it's important to, no one really knows what strategy is. Planning and strategy get mixed up, tactics get thrown in there, but the way I like to look at it is strategy is how you think about what you think, and it's really, really important for us to do this today more than any other time. Planning is how you think about what you do, and tactics, of course, is how you do what you do. My job is the thing at the top. When I have impact on my clients, I actually change the way they think about what they think about their brands. So, of course, potentially, it's a very exciting job, and I enjoy it immensely when I get to do it. I've done it for some very large companies. I've worked with big stars like Robbie and Cal, and I've done a lot of work in entertainment. So mainly my work's been in CPG and consumer goods, in TMT, technology, media, and telco, and some stuff in entertainment and pharma, and more recently a small amount of damage in financial services as well. But the overall job is marketing transformation. There is so much talk about transformation. Alongside disruption, transformation is hot on its heels for becoming another extremely annoying word. Digital transformation, perhaps most of all, because really very few people, particularly on the supply side, seem to have the faintest idea of what it means. I just think of marketing transformation as being one simple thing: keeping up with the consumer, keeping up with the network consumer. So this has changed the role of strategy. It used to be about applying lessons from the past, using very, very clearly defined frameworks, Michael Porter and so on, to actually show how the business can configure itself to create what you might call enterprise value. Now, post-digital, this has changed extraordinarily, and when I talk about my business having been disrupted, you can see I really mean it. Strategy is now not about focusing on the past and inside the business, but actually focusing on the future and outside the business. In other words, we need to learn to read what's going on networks. And just before anyone thinks otherwise, I'm not just talking about social listening here. So you see the point: disruption. Disruption, I think, is best defined as fundamental, hard-to-predict shifts in the cultural and the commercial context. And of course, where it gets really interesting for us is the overlap between culture and commerce. That's where our brands live, right in that interface. It's a dangerous and interesting place to live. Always has been, never more dangerous, never more interesting than it is today. So these shifts create uncertainty, particularly for us, by powerfully challenging what is meaningful and what is valuable to consumers. And it's the acceleration of that that makes our job more and more difficult. Now, there's a couple of technologies that are coming down the pipe. All of you by now will be aware of the slightly worrying Oculus Rift. I have no idea whether to take it seriously or not. You certainly don't look very good using it. I think that's clear. How many people have actually seen a film of someone deep in an Oculus Rift experience? It is one of the more embarrassing things to watch. They look like they're having a fit that they're enjoying enormously, I think is probably the best way of describing it. So virtual reality is coming back into view. A lot of my clients, big brands, again, people like the Unilevers and the Diageos and the Cokes are of course getting interested in it because it's where some of the richest consumer attention is to be found. Therefore, in some way or other, we have to be there. At least we have to understand what's going on. However, I'm sure you're relieved, I'm not going to be talking much about virtual reality today. What I'd like to talk a bit more is embedded intelligence, this awful phrase, the Internet of Things or the Web of Things. Shocking phrase, not a whole lot of use, doesn't explain anything to anybody, but if we think of it as embedded intelligence, in other words, smart stuff that happens in our environment, that's a good, simple way of looking at it. As Dave Trott said earlier on, and I enjoyed all the talks this morning, actually. They were all really informative. But as Dave said, simple is best. Now, going back to virtual reality for a second, it's nothing new. Superscape, I don't know how many of us remember Superscape. They're an American company back in, I think originally in the 80s, that started pioneering virtual experiences. It's been around for a long time. And the same, actually, to some extent, with Internet of Things. So much of what we take for granted as day-to-day technologies came from this place, Xerox PARC. And this guy, Mark Weiser, who's dead now, sadly, was in many ways the father of the Internet of Things, and he created an idea that he called ubiquitous computing, which is basically processing power everywhere. And that, in many ways, and look how long ago it is, what is that, 25 years ago, something like that, that anticipates what we think of today with that awful phrase, the Internet of Things. But I love what he has to say. The most profound technologies are those that disappear. They weave themselves into the fabric of everyday life until they're indistinguishable from it. Now, isn't that interesting, given that our job in media is typically to command and reward quality consumer attention? When IoT starts coming into the equation, we start to see that some of the most valuable things that we can do for our consumers, automated services triggered by Internet of Things, will also command very little of their actual attention, but deliver extraordinary value. And this begins to move us in the direction of beginning to think about advertising as less about being apologetic entertainment, which it sometimes is, and more into being value-added utility. Look at the explosion of the app obviously in Android and also on Apple, the explosion of the app. So many of the apps that we have on that interface day after day are useful things that make us happy. They don't jump out on us and attack us with some sort of data-driven messaging or other. So how did we get here? Well, Tim Berners-Lee invented, or rather wrote a paper that led to the invention of what we now know as the World Wide Web in 1989. That was communication. Second stage of the web, content. Really, there's lots of conversations about content. I think we can all agree, however, that content really landed on the web with the launch of Apple's iPhone, which of course I think was in June 1997. At that point, content was front and center in everyone's attention. Why? Because it was everywhere. It was in your pocket, and it was rich, and it was exciting. Now, probably, 2 years ago, Google acquired a little company called Nest for, I think, about $3 billion. You know the story of Nest. It's a clever thermostat that basically adjusts the temperature of your house and learns all sorts of other things that no doubt will unfold in the future. Otherwise, Google wouldn't have bought it, because they're not really in the business of thermostats. But here's the thing. If the first age was the age of communication, or connection, if you like, the second age was the age of content, the third age of the web is the age of context. And conveniently, I wrote a book on this. That's the end of that plug. But what I wanted to show you was, again, going back to Nike, that first Wieden and Kennedy ad that I showed you with the boy running around in the street chasing other people and the whole thing. A brilliant piece of creative. Wieden and Kennedy, 2001. Isn't it interesting how exciting outdoors can be made to look by a great piece of brand work? And that's kind of going to be I'm going to stick with Nike a little bit because everyone talks about them all the time, but it's quite good to look at them in a slightly different light.
It all started with a sensor in a shoe that talked to an iPod, which tracked all the glorious miles you run and created a community of runners around the world. By bringing together music, data, and social networking, the Nike Plus platform forever changed how the world runs. End of story? Hardly. How do you use this platform to reach out to a whole new audience and give them fresh reasons to hit the streets? You invite them to make history on a single day, and you plan for one hell of an after party. On August 31st, the largest running event in history went down, and it couldn't have happened without Nike Plus. Because unlike your average 10K, runners had a choice: race in an official race city or race anywhere in the world with Nike Plus. As the lead agency, we were tasked with connecting people in an innovative way in the digital space and beyond. The Human Race site was designed to help connect runners all over the globe, whether they shared the same location, charity, or power songs. Users could join running teams and challenge each other. And nothing says world unity like some good old-fashioned trash talk. Athletes and celebrities were more than happy to oblige.
You mother truckers want to race? Let's run the world, baby!
Even the U.S. Army had a few choice words for their fellow servicemen.
You better get running.
The videos were seeded out as online exclusives and housed on a YouTube brand channel. And let's not forget music. To boost runners on 10K training runs, sport music mixes combined expert coaching with adrenaline-pumping beats. Excitement for August 31st began to build, spilling out into the streets. And finally, race day arrived. Runners sounded off in video booths on how it felt to make history. Meanwhile, people all around the world were running their 10K anywhere they wanted, thanks to Nike Plus. Race results were displayed in real time on the site. Post-race concerts rocked thousands of sweaty fans at the finish line. Runners even commemorated the event by making their own personalized race day book. People began flooding photo sites like Flickr, SmugMug, and PhotoBucket as the buzz spread around the world. When it was all over, the stats were unprecedented. 800,000 people ran in 142 different countries, running 2.5 million miles and competing in 280,000 new Nike Plus challenges. But perhaps more importantly, millions of dollars were raised for 3 global charity partners. And it couldn't have happened without putting a sensor in a shoe and pairing it with the world's largest online running.
Just putting a sensor in a shoe. Now, what's happened since is that those sensors are now everywhere in our environment, pushing out into all sorts of areas. An Apple smartphone, for example, the Apple iPhone 6 has a sensor in it that if it senses more than a certain amount of acceleration, it's designed that if you drop it by accident, it shuts the phone down so that any core functions are not disturbed. But that's relatively high end. We've got pharmaceuticals, we've got computers themselves, television houses, watches, shopping, cameras, luggage, clothing, and so forth. And I'm not one of those people that is going to stand here and tell you that the Internet of Things is going to change everything in a minute. I'm not going to tell you that what happens when all of those things get joined up, it's not going to be a complete clusterfuck, because it will be. It's going to be a disaster. And the major promise of the Internet of Things will land in pockets around the world. But over time, we will see transformations. But what's really interesting, just like the famous 3D printing, which has been threatening to land for so many years, but never quite seems to. Of course, it is landing in certain areas. But my point is this. We need to focus on the cultural changes that this type of technology introduces, not just immediately on the business opportunity. And the cultural changes are quite extraordinary.